A civil war reached its heights in the Patrian continent until the North made some inhuman experiments to turn people into incarnates and change the tide of the battle. Those experiments gave Hank Henriette the power of a godly mythical beast, enabling him to shapeshift into a werewolf and end the war. But as soon as the war ends, the country realizes they won't be able to control someone who has the power of a god. They decide his life holds no more value to them and shoot him with a god-killer bullet. The Civil War started when the Northern Union Patria and the Southern Confederation of Patria discovered a precious mineral called somnium. The Norths were on the losing side until they started using somnium to create the Incarnates. Incarnates are the product born from the research of one individual called Elaine, and soon they were used on the battlefield, dominating the South with their monstrous strength and powers. The North started winning every single skirmish continuously, but something unexpected happened. The Incarnates and soldiers were rounding up the Southern captives when one of their comrades, Abi the Hydra, starts killing the captives and his fellow comrades. Hank, the captain of this freak show, orders the soldiers not to kill Abi as he tried to stop the Snake Man. Abi regained consciousness for a few seconds and begs Hank to stop him. Before Hank could do anything, the human soldiers start losing their cannons, unleashing steel balls of explosive power against the monster. Abi turned back to his normal form and tells Hank that he wasn't the one responsible. Hank calls for a medic, only to see the look of terror on the human soldiers' faces. Before Hank could stop Abi apologizes to him and decides to disappear like most fathers. After the incident, Elaine revealed to Hank and Cain that Abi had talked to her about his worsening condition. However, Elaine couldn't do anything because she didn't know how to stop it from happening. She explains that Abi's incarnate powers were starting to take over him, turning him into a true beast. During Abi's burial, Hank gave everyone a speech, revealing that what happened to Abi might also happen to them. He told them they weren't true beasts, they were still human, but they should swear that before they completely lost their sanity, they should be put down by their comrades. A couple of weeks later, the North started marching toward the southern capital, which also cost the squad their members as they began losing their sanity to the beast inside them, forcing their comrades to turn friendly fire on. After a long and arduous series of battles, they were going to march to the capital. Hank notices his comrades were losing heart and announces that he was going to ask Elaine out, because that will probably solve most of the problem, right? Well, pretty much everyone in the squad pushed him to be with her. Hank asks them to celebrate it with him once the war was over, so they all had to come back alive, causing an eruption of joy from the Incarnates. Hank talked with Cain Madhouse, his and Elaine's childhood friend. They reminisced on how they had become good friends despite their backgrounds. Cain advised him to help Elaine as she was trying to handle everything herself. Later that night, Hank visited Elaine, and she asks they talk outside. Elaine reveals to him that the war was already over and that the North and the South were already preparing for the peace treaty. Hank was glad that there would be peace again, but she tells him it didn't include the Incarnates. Elaine then shoots Hank with a god-killer bullet and tells him that all Incarnates would eventually lose all their humanity to the beast inside them. Once that happened, the Incarnates would be the greatest threat that humanity would ever face. Even though they were regarded as gods on the battlefield, many people still feared them. And once the war was officially over, the Incarnates were going to be disposed of. Elaine had tried to find a way to prevent Incarnates from becoming mindless beasts, but her only solution was to kill them before they became a menace to society, especially since she had created them in the first place. She also adds that Hank was too kind and gentle, he would try to stop her, so she had to kill him first before going after the remaining Incarnates. She hugs him and then turns to Cain, giving him the god-killer bullet. The two had planned to kill the squad that night, but then something happens. Cain betrays Elaine and shoots her. This quickly became a madhouse, pun intended. As Hank's vision fades, he sees Elaine's dead eyes, and Cain laughing before he finally loses his consciousness. 2 months later, Hank wakes up in the military hospital. Second Lieutenant Lisa Mommy Runecastle tells him that the war is over. The Incarnate squad disbanded and was sent off by Cain to go wherever they want. But most of them became insane and caused destruction wherever they went. She also tells Hank that Cain and Elaine have been missing since that night. After being betrayed, Hank goes on a mad quest to slay the remaining Incarnates and find out where Cain is. Hank starts with his comrade Eddie, who is a lizard-like beast with camouflage powers. Eddie tells him that he's a war hero thanks to the power of the Incarnate. But Hank tells him that he has come to fulfill their oath, and Incarnates don't have a place in this world, especially if they're going insane and killing people. Hank throws his spear and detonates the bomb attached to it, killing Eddie. A few days later, Hank visits William Bancroft's town to kill him. William Bancroft had returned to his town in his dragon form. He's now helping his daughter to run an orphanage. Although the kids were scared at first, they warmed up to him when they realized who he was. But one night, Will gave in to the beast and let out a loud roar. After that, the townspeople started reporting that their livestock were being killed. They asked for Will to wear a chain attached to a heavy metal ball to prove his innocence. Will, seeing what his family were facing, goes to live in the forest. Although he's been relatively tame compared to Eddie and Abby, Hank still kills Will to prevent him from becoming a threat to the people. However, Hank didn't see Shawl witnessing him killing her father. While resting in a bar in another town, Shawl, who's been looking for him, suddenly bursts into the room and shoots Hank with a rifle. But normal bullets can't kill an incarnate, so Hank goes after her and takes her away as the people are surprised that he wasn't dead. He interrogates the girl, and she reveals that she's Will's daughter. However, Hank's got someone else in mind, Danny, another incarnate in town, who is his target. He tells Shawl to stay put and reveals to her that he is also an incarnate as he goes to confront Danny. Hank faces Danny and tells him of his crimes, which are looting merchants and pillaging their wagons. But Shawl pulls the dumb girl card and goes between them, trying to stop Hank from killing Danny. But Danny says the merchants won't give him money if he asks nicely, so he had to kill them. Seems logical if you're a criminal. Danny transforms into a rhino-like beast and tries to punch Shawl. Hank is quick to push her away. Danny starts attacking Hank, but Hank's already on his shoulders. Hank pierces Danny's chest with his bomb spear, detonating it as soon as he gets off the creature. The bomb explodes, and before Hank delivers the final blow, Danny tells him that he only did that because their town is so poor they couldn't even drink coffee. So he's blaming the lack of caffeine. With his final words heard, Hank shoots him down as Danny's mother cries for the loss of her son. Before leaving, Shawl asks him if he's going to kill more of his comrades. Hank answers that they swore an oath. Once someone happens to turn into a beast, they must die. Shawl tries to stop him and asks what had happened to the Incarnate squad. But Hank couldn't give her an answer. She tells him she will accompany him to find out the truth. A couple of days later, Hank and Shawl arrive in Roguehill Town, which is currently being terrorized by the Minotaur Incarnate. Hank meets Mommy Lisa in the town. She informs him that he needs to put a stop to the Minotaur's rampage. Roguehill is known as a town where the war never ends, and apparently, the Incarnate creates a fortress by disassembling the city inhabitants' houses. The Incarnate also keeps warning everyone that the enemy will be coming, and there's no better time than now to prepare for war. Lisa tells him that every citizen will become homeless if the Incarnate continues to build his fortress. Shawl protests against killing the Minotaur and suggests convincing him instead, which prompts Lisa to ask Hank who Shawl is. Hank tells her that Shawl is the daughter of an Incarnate. Lisa tells Shawl that convincing the Minotaur is impossible, and as you know it, Mommy is always right. Just then the Minotaur comes out from the fortress and declares that they should prepare for war. Hank asks Lisa if she got what he asked for and tells her that he's going by nightfall. Shawl sees the destruction and asks Lisa why the Incarnate would attack his own people after the war had already ended. Lisa tells Shawl only an Incarnate can understand another Incarnate. She also shows Shawl the god-killing bullet Hank had asked her to bring. Once night arrives, Shawl accompanies Hank to the fortress entrance. Hank asks if she is ready, and she assures him she won't cause him any trouble. However, while exploring the fortress, Hank tells her it wasn't an ordinary fortress. They come across the skeletons of fallen soldiers who were sent into the fortress and killed by traps. Scared, Shawl backs away only to spring a trap, which almost slices her in half. But Hank saves her just in time and warns her not to wander on her own. She then asks Hank about the Minotaur's backstory, and he tells her about Theo's panicky nature and PTSD, just what we needed. Hank wasn't surprised Theo had erected such a massive fortress full of traps, as he had once taught Theo to always prepare before going into battle. Once they reach the entrance, Hank tells Shawl to wait as he enters to face Theo. Lisa, who had followed them, tells Shawl that Hank requested her presence since he didn't plan on bringing Shawl along. But Shawl tells her that she isn't going back, and she wants to follow Hank till the end to understand him. Seeing her determination, Lisa helps her open the gate and urges her to go after Hank. Hank reunites with Theo, and the Incarnate greets him with his usual anxiety over imaginary enemies. Hank declares himself as the enemy, prompting Theo to transform into a Minotaur, activating his trap cards. Hank tries to attack Theo, but he's knocked away with his horn. Hank steps on the ground, which turns out to be a pitfall, and becomes trapped by Theo's barrage of projectiles. Shawl and Lisa make their way to where they are fighting, and Shawl screams at Theo to stop. Lisa tells her it's hopeless and that she shouldn't worry about Hank. Just as Theo is about to finish Hank off with his giant axe, Hank transforms into a werewolf. Lisa tells Shawl that Hank is one of the few incarnates that reveals their true power at night. She knows his real night power. Hank scratches Theo in the face with his claw. Theo, seeing the blood, becomes more paranoid and begins activating all the traps. The traps are no match for Hank's keen senses and insane agility. Once Theo's trap hurls Hank into the air, he uses the elevation to deliver a swift and devastating claw attack that rips through Theo's iron armor. Theo tells Hank that he now has peace, just like how he was before going into war. With Theo's final words delivered, Hank delivers the final blow, killing his comrade once and for all. Another one bites the duster. Shawl, seeing Hank's sad expression, realizes that Hank must be going through a lot of pain whenever he kills his comrade. Meanwhile, there's an incarnate extermination squad, coup de grace, led by a man named Captain Claude, whose only wish is to put an end to all beast incarnates. Hank and Shawl travel by train to another town. Shawl, who hasn't been on a train before, is amazed by the moving vehicle. She chats with the conductor, who expresses that the war is over and the Iron Bridge serves as a monument of peace. However, she remembers Hank saying that the war wasn't over yet and wonders what he truly meant. Before they continue, Lisa stops the train and takes them away to brief Hank about another incarnate. Apparently, a benevolent incarnate called the Behemoth is on a collision course with the recently built Iron Bridge. The commander also expresses that they've tried to stop Behemoth, but couldn't as he keeps moving ahead. Lisa asks Hank if he knows Behemoth's motives. He looks at the map and has a sudden realization, but he tells her he doesn't know. Hank tells them that it's impossible to fatally wound Behemoth since he has a very high regenerative ability. He explains that although they can't injure Behemoth because of his body, some parts like his back joint could be injured. So, his plan is to slow Behemoth down with the cannons so he could deal with an attack at the back joint of the beast. As soon as Behemoth arrives, the soldiers are frightened of the huge monster, but Hank tells them not to be scared and orders them to start firing, which disables the monster. Hank proceeds with his plan, and they stop Behemoth, who collapses to the ground. The soldiers pin down Behemoth the next morning, but his wound is healing gradually. Shawl, who heard from Lisa that Behemoth hasn't attacked any populated cities. This means he still has some humanity left in him and tries to convince him to turn back. However, Behemoth looks ahead, making her realize that there must be something Behemoth is going after. He might be looking for Mommy. Meanwhile, the same rail president who made the bridge starts ranting about the Behemoth taking too long to be killed. Lisa explains that they will try to cut off Behemoth's route by blowing the cliffs to fill the valley, thus diverting his attention, and then take care of Behemoth after. But the men argue that if they won't kill the beast, they will do it themselves. Hank gives them a threatening look and tells them that their plan won't change. Shawl asks to speak with Hank. She wants to know who Behemoth was. Hank tells her that the Behemoth is Artie, a man of few words who never complained and followed all orders. Artie rarely talked about what he wanted or what he would like to do, so he doesn't know much about Artie. Shawl tells him that Behemoth had a reason for heading forward and asks Hank if he has an idea. Hank has a flashback of Artie drawing something in a book, but he tells Shawl that even if he did know, he was there to kill the Behemoth, not help him. Shawl tries to convince Hank not to kill Artie, but he tells her that the Behemoth was going to destroy the bridge if he didn't stop him. With tears in her eyes, Shawl expresses that Artie hadn't hurt anyone and had a dream to achieve. So what was wrong with an incarnate living out his dream? She tries to talk to Lisa, but she tells her that they can't let the Behemoth live. Sooner or later, they will be ordered to eliminate him. Later that night, the men from earlier ambush the soldiers and activate the explosions, which enrage the Behemoth. He crushes the men when they try to escape. Hank tells the soldiers that there will be a change of plan and instructs them to plant the remaining explosives in the area he mentioned earlier. Hank transforms into a werewolf to stop the raging incarnate. Artie realizes he couldn't move and tries to stomp Hank, but Hank dodges the attack. Hank tries to claw Artie, but the toughened skin doesn't allow him to, so he goes for the softer skin under the Behemoth's neck, which he can claw, aggravating him even more. Artie tries to stomp him again, but Hank is able to push his leg, and causes him to fall on his side. Then Hank signals the soldiers to blow the cliff. The debris traps Artie on top of explosives, which the soldiers activate, blowing the monster's guts out. However, Artie still moves, even with his guts spilled out, walking as fast as he can toward the bridge. Shawl, standing on top of the bridge, tries to convince Artie once again, but he isn't listening. The sun has already come up, and Hank, who has transformed back into a human, calls out to Artie, telling him not to destroy the new age they have created. But Artie keeps advancing. Artie is close to the bridge when an area from the cliff's edges explodes and collapses, revealing the view of the ocean, causing Artie to stop. He sheds tears as he sees the ocean ahead and then collapses to the ground, his dying face covered in tears. Standing in front of the ocean, Hank reveals to Shawl that Artie had once told him that he would love to see the ocean, and Artie had shown him the ocean he had drawn in his note. Shawl expresses that Hank had ordered the cliff to be blown so Artie could see the ocean. Hank tells her that, but still, he had killed Artie, but she tells him that because of him, Artie could fulfill his dream. A couple of days later, the group arrives in Whiteckerch town, which is being terrorized by another incarnate. Lisa shows them the area where they believe Cain was last seen and the possibility that he was killing the citizens every night. Hank suggests getting more information from the citizens, but no one talks, even if they mention they are from the military. Lisa suggests resting in the meantime, but Hank insists on continuing to investigate. Later that night, Shawl tries to talk to Hank about something, but he turns and goes to sleep. She notices the hole in his uniform from her rifle shot and decides to mend it. Hank wakes up to see her sewing his uniform, and they talk about orphanages. Hank grew up in one, and Shawl took care of the one her father owned. Shawl gives him his uniform, and he tells her he knew someone who had blue eyes like hers. Shawl asks if the person was Elaine, and Hank asks how she knew. Shawl tells him that he had mentioned her name once when he was having a nightmare. Hank then reveals that Elaine was killed by Cain. He also shares all that happened in the past and his plan to kill all incarnates as his final duty as their captain. Lisa informs them of another attack, and they go to see the victim covered in blood and pinned to the wall. Hank hears from Lisa that the injury on the victim is similar to the past victims. He realizes that Cain wasn't responsible. A boy named Andy steps out of the crowd and confesses that he saw the woman being killed by a demon statue. Hank approaches Andy to ask what he saw, and Andy shows them the building where he saw the beast entering. Shawl asks Hank if it could be an incarnate, and he reveals that it's the gargoyle named Topher. Topher believed in justice, and his words of justice always kept their spirits up. Lisa tries to interrogate Andy, but he runs off. Shawl decides to talk to Andy and assures Hank she will be fine as long as she has her rifle. Shawl finds Andy and tries to get him to talk about himself, but he won't say anything. She tells him about her journey with Hank so far and that incarnates were not monsters. To stop Andy from stealing, she sees his injured arm, and that's when he reveals that his mother was killed by the gargoyle. Just then, the gargoyle appears, preaching about justice and how Andy will pay for his crime. Shawl points her rifle at Topher and tries to reason with him, but it aggravates him and he attacks her. She tries to shoot him but can't bring herself to do it. However, Hank arrives just in time to save her. Topher injures Hank when he tries to shoot him. Topher suggests they meet in the church to finish what they started. Later that night, Hank confronts Topher and immediately attacks him after seeing the corpses of the citizens. But he attacks a statue, allowing Topher to attack him from behind. Hank avoids the attack and pins down Topher, crushing his head. However, Topher suddenly shoots him with the god killer bullet that Cain had given to him earlier that night. Hank reverts to his human form. Topher is about to kill him when Andy arrives with Shawl's rifle, wanting to avenge his mother. He shoots Topher, but the bullet has no effect. Topher kicks Andy away as Shawl, who had just arrived, goes to check on Andy. Topher claims that he must serve justice and remember the first victim he killed, all in the name of justice. This guy thinks he's Kira or what? Shawl tries to stop him by calling him by his name, but Topher tells her that he's no longer Christopher, but Gargoyle. As Shawl and Andy are about to get killed by Topher, Hank removes the bullet by force and charges toward the gargoyle, piercing through its chest. Topher declares he is justice, but Hank shoots him in the head. Shawl runs to meet Hank when she realizes she's engulfed in some threads. Cain arrives, telling Hank that the god killer bullet was a commemoration of their reunion. Elizabeth, a spider incarnate who had Shawl in the threads, puts Shawl to sleep while Cain sends Migliglia to give Hank an invitation. She tells him to come to their party the next day, and he will return Shawl when he comes. As Cain leaves with Shawl, Hank collapses to the ground. Hank wakes up from his nightmare of Cain shooting Elaine. He quickly remembers what had happened after seeing Shawl's rifle. Andy comes in asking who was responsible for kidnapping Shawl, but he assures him that he will save Shawl. Shawl, who is tied up in a mansion, asks Elizabeth what they want from her, and Elizabeth reveals she's the bait to lure in Hank. Shawl tells her that using her as bait won't work, but Elizabeth assures her that Hank will come to save her. Meanwhile, the squad led by Captain Claude has arrived in Whiteckerch, and after inspecting all the bodies, Captain Claude states that he has found Cain and orders Lisa to investigate a mansion of one of the victims, and his general to gather their troops. Hank attends the party. Everyone is a noble or royal from all over the country sympathizing with Cain's cause. He claims that the government had started and ended the war for their own selfish gain. They applaud Cain's speech and the Incarnates as they walk into the room. But things go wrong as the Incarnates go on a killing spree, murdering everyone. Cain declares that he's against Hank's and Elaine's notion that Incarnates should die because they will lose their humanity, while the humans whom they fought to save have no shred of humanity in them and were corrupted. Cain orders the Incarnates to kill Hank. Hank tries to fight off the Incarnates, but he's simply outnumbered. Luckily, a group of soldiers arrives led by Captain Claude, and begins attacking the Incarnates using their own new technology to easily capture the Incarnates. Hank fights the Incarnates. Claude then goes after Cain. Turns out Claude is Cain's younger brother. Claude couldn't get close to Cain as he was surrounded by Incarnates. He tries fighting them, but he was no match for them. He was almost killed by an Incarnate when Hank saves him by piercing the Incarnate's mouth. This allows Claude's men to surround him to protect him as the squad begins shooting the Incarnates. Hank tries to reach Cain but is stopped by two other Incarnates. Cain was laughing at Hank that he can't stop him when Claude fires off a cannon at Cain, making a hole in his chest. Hank sees this and quickly jumps into the air and harpoons Cain right in the face, detonating the spear bomb afterward. As the smoke clears, everyone stares at Cain's lower half, which was still standing when the upper half, which was completely blown off, began to regenerate back. Cain Madhouse, also known as the Incarnate Vampire, is an immortal. Cain asks that Hank joins him once again as his comrade, but he refuses. Cain made a signal, and Elizabeth brings Shawl. Hank tries to stop Cain, who is aiming a gun at Shawl. The Incarnates stop him, telling him to stay put, but Hank turns into a werewolf and pushes them away. He runs towards Cain and was about to attack him when Elizabeth catches him in her webs, making him watch as Cain shoots Shawl. This triggers Hank's memories of losing Elaine, and those memories make him transform into a giant white wolf, which was what Cain was after all this time. Cain declares that the huge wolf is the true form of Hank and he's the king of beasts. He states that no one will be able to tame Hank as he goes on to ravage the town. He then goes missing after literally turning Whiteckerch into a mess. Shawl survives and sees the destruction that Hank caused. The news of Whiteckerch's destruction had shaken the nation. But 2 weeks later, the nation would be shaken again as Cain and the Incarnates rally up soldiers, along with some nobles and citizens. They declared that they will be forming a new Patria, a separate state where Incarnates are revered like Olympian gods. The Northern Patria prepares for war against the Incarnates as they are slowly taking over the nation. The North declares war on the remaining Incarnates living in the North while they prepare for war against Cain. 6 months since she left the town, Shawl returns to her town, but the people are wary of her. She had somehow survived because of the dress she was wearing, which was made from an Incarnate's thread. She still doesn't know why the Incarnate made her wear that dress. But when she did come around, the military interrogated her, and she learns that the military had stripped Hank of his rank and was looking for him. She was returning from visiting her father's grave when she sees Lisa in her town along with some troops of soldiers led by Claude. Claude tells the mayor that they had come to deal with an Incarnate that had slipped into the mountains. Shawl asks Claude if she can join them, and Lisa backs her up, saying she will recommend Shawl as she's from the town and can be their guide. Claude then allows her to join them. After searching for a while, the night finally comes, and they had to camp in the mountains. Claude apologizes to her that they couldn't save her back at Whiteckerch. Lisa joins them, and Shawl learns that Claude is a major as well as the son of the North's president. Claude declares that his squad, coup de grace, will eliminate all Incarnates no matter what. There is a sudden rumble and they run to the area where the rumble came from and see a dragon. Shawl runs ahead, seeing that the dragon Incarnate is her father. The dragon's skin is already rotting. Shawl calls out to her father, but Claude saves her as the dragon swings his tail in her direction. The soldiers come around and begin shooting the dragon, but no damage is incurred. The dragon turns back to leave, and Claude stops his men from chasing after it since they don't have enough firepower to hunt it. Shawl is confused that her father is still alive. Lisa explains to Claude that the dragon is known as the Incarnate Nidhogg, and its name is William. She also states that it was killed by Hank and buried by the military. Claude, after hearing the information, orders his men to prepare their weapons as they must eliminate Nidhogg. Lisa meets with Shawl. She asks what kind of person William was and she explains that her father was a kind man who never gets angry and loved them. Lisa advises her to return to town, but Shawl says she will stay and join the fight. Lisa then hands her some god-killer bullets, telling her to use them when the time is right. They wait as a soldier lures Nidhogg their way, and Claude then gives the order to commence the attack. The soldiers begin firing at Nidhogg after capturing him, but he unleashes fireballs at them, causing them to fall back. Nidhogg chases them, but he activates a series of explosive traps. To avoid the attacks, Nidhogg begins flying towards the town. Claude asks Shawl and Lisa to return to town to evacuate the people. Claude shoots the wings of Nidhogg, blowing them off. Nidhogg retaliates by shooting his fireball back at him. Shawl and Lisa try to warn the people to run, but they wouldn't listen until Nidhogg begins attacking the village. Shawl finally understands Hank's ideal to put an end to the Incarnate. He was preserving their wishes as humans. She then makes up her mind to put an end to her father to save the town. She remembers her father's words and begins shooting at Nidhogg, begging him to stop. She shoots him in the chest, and before her father passes away, he stretches his claw to her, which she holds onto as the body crumbles. The next morning, she tells Lisa she's glad she could finally say goodbye to her father, but thinks about Hank and wonders if there's a way to save the Incarnate that doesn't involve their deaths. Shawl requests that she joins them on their mission to find Hank, and Claude allows her, since having her around when they find Hank will be beneficial to them. The North President, Richard Withers, orders the extermination of the Incarnates within 3 months, and the generals wonder why the president is rushing and state that it's the president's way of saving the nation by using his son, Claude, as a political pawn. The soldiers are camped at the seaside, waiting for the supply ship to arrive, and Claude is frustrated that they will have to wait for days before the ship arrives. Shawl is admiring the view of the ocean, thinking of Hank when she hears singing. She goes to where the singing is coming from and enters a cave. In the cave, she meets a siren incarnate named Trice. Shawl was enjoying the music when a man, Charles, holds her at gunpoint, telling her to return and forget what she saw. But Trice tells him to leave Shawl alone. Shawl reveals that she's Will's daughter, and then they sit down to talk. Charles apologizes to her and states that because of the government's orders to kill incarnates, he wants to protect Trice from the townsfolk and the governor. The bounty on her head will make people turn her in, and they are afraid of her as well. Charles tells her that Trice had worked in his bar as a singer, which made Shawl excited that she's talking to a singer. But Trice tells her that it was in the past. Trice explains that because of the war, at some point everyone stopped valuing her song, and when she was enlisted in the army, she used her voice to kill people. But when they returned, people celebrated them but still looked at them as monsters, and no one wanted to hear a monster sing. So, she's been hiding until Charles finally found her. Trice expresses that she wants to put an end to her hiding, which Charles is against. But Shawl tells her that she would like to come to see her again and talk with her. Shawl keeps her promise and visits Trice every day, bringing her gifts and some items. They talk about Hank, and Trice expresses her desire to sing again in front of a crowd. Shawl assures her that that day will come. Shawl returns to the camp but meets Claude, who tells her not to roam around aimlessly since the townspeople are wary of soldiers. They talk and Claude reveals that Cain is his older brother, and it is his duty to kill Cain, Hank, and other incarnates. Charles is confronted by the townsfolk who want to know what he's hiding, but he escapes from them and is shot. Charles goes to see Trice, who tells him about her wish to leave the town and come back to sing again someday. Charles tells her to run as the townspeople are looking for her, but before breathing his last breath, he tells her that she shouldn't hold it against them as they are just scared of the future. Later that night, Trice returns to the town singing, and this puts the people who hear it into a deep sleep. Claude orders his men to find Trice after hearing from Lisa that Trice is responsible for putting the people to sleep. He and his men find her seated on a fountain singing, and the men give in to the song and fall asleep while Claude tries to fight it. Just then, Shawl arrives and asks Trice why she was hurting the people. Trice says she's saving them from their painful future. Shawl tells her that Trice wasn't acting like herself, which makes Trice come back to her senses. Claude shoots her, and she flies away while Shawl chases after her. Trice goes to Charles' bar, which had been burnt down, and Shawl catches up to her. Trice expresses that she couldn't sing anymore on the stage she once loved because people see her as a monster. She asks if Shawl will hear her sing. Shawl tells her she would like to hear her sing. Trice is about to sing when she is shot by soldiers. Claude orders them to finish Trice but then tells them to stop as Shawl goes to her side. Shawl opens her mouth to sing, and Claude is about to order them to shoot, but Shawl tells him not to, as the song is different. Trice tells Shawl she was okay, and in her last moment, Trice performs a song, which Shawl admits was beautiful when she was done, and hearing this, Trice passes on. The ship had arrived, and they were preparing to leave. Claude meets with Shawl and tells her that they've found Hank at the Central Mountains, but warns her that the next time she interferes, they will shoot through her. Shawl tells him she wanted to save Trice because they were friends, even if it was for a short time. Meanwhile, Hank was fulfilling the oath but couldn't transform into his wolf as memories of his rampage flood his mind. The incarnate he was fighting tries to kill him, but he was able to kill the incarnate using the bomb's spear despite his injuries. His blood trails allow Garm to trace his whereabouts. Hank aimlessly traveled into the frozen mountains somewhere in Patrian, his mind burdened with the weight of his past actions. Exhausted and haunted by memories of comrades he had killed and their last words to him, he collapsed on the icy ground. His resolve, however, compelled him to get back up and continue walking, muttering to himself that he must fulfill his oath. As he ventured further, Hank's senses sharpened, sensing an approaching danger. Without warning, he was attacked by another incarnate, a werewolf named Roy. The fierce confrontation ensued, with Roy questioning Hank's rejection of Cain's proposal and threatening to kill him if he didn't comply. But Hank stood his ground, stating that he too must kill Roy to fulfill his oath. Meanwhile, Shawl and the others had reached the mountain. Shawl thinks of a way to save Hank as Claude had given the order to shoot Hank on sight. Hank loads his gun and prepares to attack Garm. Garm, who can smell Hank's tension, calls out to him to stop hiding as it is futile. Garm charges at Hank and attacks the tree he's hiding behind, but Hank dodges the attack and manages to shoot Garm. However, Garm blocks the bullets with his hand. Garm charges at a startled Hank and injures him. Garm tells a weakened Hank to transform and fight him in his incarnate form. Just then, the sun begins to rise, and Hank's white hair turns black. Garm tells him he'll make him transform later and proceeds to leave the scene. Claude, torn between his mission and his concern for Hank, had overexerted himself, succumbing to a high fever. They took him to a fort where Shawl took care of him. He tries to continue the mission, but Shawl tells him to rest as the general had sent scouting parties to look for Hank. Claude asks Shawl why she chooses to protect the Incarnates. She tells him she believes that the Incarnates could live side by side with humans, and she wants to find a way to make it come to pass. The general comes to report that they've seen Hank, but there is another Incarnate as well. Claude orders the general to conduct a strategy meeting immediately. The soldiers prepared for the upcoming confrontation, led by the general as Claude's health deteriorated. Despite his protests, Claude understood the importance of prioritizing his well-being. Amid the ongoing conflict, Hank found himself plagued by a nightmarish vision, reliving the moment he killed Elaine. The darkness of his past consumed him, and when he awoke, Garm was still there, waiting to challenge him again. The confrontation continued, with Garm relentlessly pushing Hank to transform into his werewolf form. As the soldiers and Shawl drew closer to the battleground, Garm keeps pressuring Hank to transform into his werewolf form, but Hank is still trying to defeat the beast in his human form. After his futile effort, Garm has him in a chokehold, telling him to fight back in his incarnate form. But Hank tells him he won't, and Garm was just Cain's dog. Angry, Garm pierces Hank's chest and starts squeezing it. Memories of Shawl and Elaine's death flood Hank's memories, and he finally turns into his werewolf form, pleasing Garm. The clash between the two monstrous beings intensified as Hank struggled to control his unleashed power. He remembers his transformation as the giant white wolf, and with a loud roar Hank reverts to his human form. Garm finds Hank's power play super pathetic and throws him at the nearest cliff. He then keeps on stomping Hank's chest, calling him worthless and how Hank can't save them if he's so weak. Before Garm could deliver the final blow, the soldiers come into the scene, shooting at Garm. Garm dodges one of the bullets, which lands beside Hank, causing the cliff to collapse. Shawl calls out to Hank as he falls off the cliff. Garm recalls how Hank was his hope. He had been transformed into an incarnate after surviving the battlefield, and thanks to Hank, he could sail through. But looking at a defeated Hank, he was disappointed and ran away from the soldiers as they continued shooting at him. Garm, injured, couldn't understand how the soldiers kept finding him and shooting him, but he wasn't going to die easily and chose to attack all the soldiers. This caused a major loss for the soldiers, and they had to call for backup. Claude also joins them despite Lisa's protest, but he tells her that he wants to save his men and Shawl as well. Hank had a dream that he was resting on Elaine's lap and woke up on Shawl's lap. He is surprised that she's alive but grateful that she is okay. She tells him that she went back to her hometown. Shawl informs him that her father, whom Hank previously shot dead, was reanimated as a zombified incarnate, so she killed him. After killing her dad, Shawl tells him that somehow she understands why Hank is killing incarnates. Hank talks about his worries that his comrades must have hated him for what he did to them, and he worries if they were saved or ever going to forgive him. Just because he wanted to keep the path he made for them, he had stripped them of their chance to enjoy life. The more he uses his power, the more he loses himself, and maybe he's the real beast. He asks her if she will kill him when he becomes a monster, but she tells him no. He apologizes for asking her to do something like that. He puts on his uniform and goes to finish his fight with Roy. Hank asks Shawl that although they might turn into monsters someday, him included, she shouldn't forget about them. Hank leaves and sets out to finally kill his friend and comrade. Garm continues attacking the soldiers but falls for their trap the moment he grabs the general. He tells the general that he will also die if his men start shooting. But the general fearlessly faced the menacing Incarnate, asserting that sacrificing himself to ensure his team's survival was a risk worth taking. Without hesitation, the soldiers encircled Garm and launched harpoons at him, followed by a barrage of bullets. However, much to their shock and dismay, their assault seemed ineffective against the formidable beast. Garm, undeterred by the wounds inflicted, maintained his resolve to end the general's life. But his dark intentions were thwarted when Claude arrived on the scene, firing 2 cannons at the wounded Incarnate, inflicting significant damage. With Claude's intervention, Garm was temporarily deterred, cautioning the general against any further reckless attempts, and voiced his desire for his team. Meanwhile, deep within the cave, Shawl contemplated the trials and struggles Hank must have endured throughout his journey. Filled with determination and a profound desire to protect him, she made a resolute promise to herself. She will shield Hank from harm and ensure he never succumbs to the darkness that lurked within him. Garm flees the scene, bleeding profusely and having lost a lot of blood. At that moment, he sees Hank and rushes to attack him, stating that Hank won't be able to stop him from pursuing his goal. Hank's plan was to activate the bomb the moment Garm reaches him. Just as Garm closed in on Hank, Shawl intervened, swiftly taking aim and shooting the tenacious Incarnate. Her voice rang out, reminding Hank of his humanity, and she swore an oath to him to preserve his humanity no matter the circumstances. She fiercely declared that if he ever deviated, she would be prepared to stop him herself. She continues shooting at Garm, who was trying to attack them, and as she reloads the rifle, she tells Hank to continue keeping the oath he made to his comrades. Garm tells her to stay away from their fight and tries to attack, but Hank had heard the words of encouragement he needed to carry on. So, he steps in front of Shawl and transforms into his werewolf form, delivering a powerful blow to Garm. They both let out a roar and begin fighting. Teeth and claws clashed as they grappled, their raw power on full display. The soldiers watching from a distance remained transfixed, unable to intervene in the chaotic exchange between the two fearsome beings. Finally, Hank delivers the final blow, piercing Garm through the chest. They both revert to their human form, and Roy acknowledges that he was glad to have Hank as his captain. Hearing his words, Hank thanks him for being his comrade, and once again, Hank delivers the final blow by shooting him, laying another Incarnate to rest. Shawl approaches, asking him to tell her who Roy she was as once to remember him also. He tells her that Roy was the jovial one in their squad, diligent with their missions, and he was sure that he would have been a great friend to Shawl if they had met. The soldiers have found Cain's fortress at Bold Creek. A week later, it is reported to the president, who gives out an order that the fortress should be brought down no matter what. Soldiers begin marching toward the fortress, signaling the beginning of the war. Hank is captured by the soldiers and interrogated by Claude, who asks him to tell him everything about the remaining Incarnates. Claude is shocked that Hank knows he's Cain's younger brother and asks Hank why his brother had betrayed them. Hank tells him he knows nothing about Cain's betrayal, but he knows how to end the Incarnates. Claude doesn't like his answer and is about to beat Hank when Shawl steps in. She tells Claude that he should work with Hank since they share a common goal. Claude is worried that Hank might go on a rampage again, but Shawl assures him that she had promised to kill Hank if he ever goes berserk. Just then, the general comes in to present an order from the president that they are to head to Bold Creek immediately to destroy the new Patrian fortress and stop Cain. Claude and his troops march towards Bold Creek, forming an alliance with Hank to defeat Cain. They arrive at the area and see the main troop camping site and the fortress as well. Claude, the general, and Hank go to talk to the colonel in charge of the force. The colonel explains their trouble. They have lost some men and have some injured due to the enemy's long-range bow and arrow attacks, preventing them from getting near the fortress. Hank tells the colonel that they are dealing with the Incarnate Centaurus, who is a skilled sniper and knows how to defend his base. Their best chance is a night raid, and Hank offers to act as bait to lure out Miles, the Centaurus. Miles will try to use his voice to instill fear in the soldiers. Later that night, the soldiers are ready to attack. Hank knows that Miles isn't a good sniper at night, so he plans to fight up close. Not long after, arrows are shot that miss, and Miles emerges from the forest, stabbing one of the soldiers and screaming as Hank predicted. The battalion runs out of fear as Miles chases after them, killing them one after the other. Hank lures Miles into a trap, catching him in a net, and the soldiers shoot at him. Hank transforms back to his human form and prepares to use the God Killer bullet to shoot Miles. But Miles's bullet injuries heal up and he claims he's become immortal and quickly flees the scene while the soldiers rain bullets on him. The next day, since Miles hasn't attacked them, they are able to get closer to the fortress. The army readies themselves and starts digging trenches. The colonel tells them they will start attacking once the trenches are complete. He also mentions that some saw another incarnate that wasn't the centaur, but he dismisses it as fear-induced hallucinations. Their goal is to bring the fortress down, no matter the casualties. Later that night, the soldiers prepare for the battle the following morning. Shawl talks with Hank, and they reminisce about their first meeting, which makes Hank laugh. Hank tells her that the oath is what kept him alive, and she tells him that he should stay alive until the very end and return after the war. The next morning, the time finally comes, and the commander signals the attack to commence. The men are charging towards the fortress despite the cannons firing at them. The men were scared, but Hank charged in, giving them morale, and waves upon waves of northern soldiers rushed to the fortress. The enemy was also ready, firing at them from the fortress, and the northerners retaliated with their own cannons. Around sunset, the northerners had managed to get to the fortress foot, and there was a brief ceasefire. Hank was wary as he waited for Miles to show up. Miles ambushed them from behind and started firing his arrows freely, killing the northern soldiers left and right. The soldiers tried to stop him, but Miles easily killed them with his arrows. Miles tried to lure the soldiers away from the main army, but he was heading toward a trap. The soldiers tripped the centaur, and Hank attacks him with the spear bomb, blowing his right arm away. Hank states that Miles the doctor had died a long time ago, but Miles laughed, saying the doctor in him was saved once he became an incarnate. Miles recalled how, despite being an army surgeon, he just couldn't save anyone because the soldiers he was treating always went to battle and came back dead. But once he became an incarnate, he could save 100 comrades by killing one enemy. At this point, Miles' arms had regenerated back, and he declares that he enjoys the scream of horror as he continually stomps on a dead soldier. Nightfall arrives, and Hank transforms into his werewolf, stating that Mills had lost his sense of humanity, and goes after Miles. The colonel, seeing this, tells his men to bring out the secret weapon. The colonel, aware of Hank's identity, calmly informs Claude that he knew who Hank was. Meanwhile, a fierce battle rages between Hank and Miles, with Hank seizing the opportunity to disarm Miles and deliver a powerful slam to the ground. Taking advantage of the situation, Hank pierces Miles's chest with the spear, leaving him immobilized. He calls out to the general, who shoots a flare, signaling the commander to bomb their location. Hank moves away as the bombs land at their location, destroying half of Miles's body. However, Miles quickly regrows his limbs. Hank prepares to use the God Killer bullet to end Miles once and for all, but a sudden encroachment of purple mist disrupts his plans. The mysterious mist, identified as Abi's poison, engulfs Miles, causing his healed body to dissolve into purple bubbles. Realizing the deadly threat of the poison, Hank takes swift action, covering his nose to protect himself from its effects. The soldiers in the vicinity fall victim to the poison. Hank quickly calls out to his fellow soldiers, urging them to evacuate the area. During the turmoil, the colonel explains to Claude the origins of the poisonous mist. He reveals that they obtained it from the research on the Hydra's corpse, gifted to them by the president. While Claude expresses concerns about their side also being affected, the colonel reassures him that it is all part of their plan to eradicate the Incarnates. Miles's body begins to melt quickly, and he tells Hank that he didn't expect to die like this, but he hopes to see him again. Hank ends Miles by shooting him with the God Killer bullet. The colonel tells Claude that they should use the momentum to attack the fortress when they suddenly hear screams coming from the camp. Cain has arrived and blasts every soldier's head without even touching them. Cain approaches the colonel and Claude. Claude tells Shawl to go hide. The colonel orders his men to shoot Cain, but the bullets have no effect, and with a wave of his hand, he kills the soldiers. The colonel calls the grenadiers to attack Cain, but he suddenly disappears from their sight. He holds one of the soldiers by the neck, filling him with blood, and the soldier suddenly attacks his own comrade. The bomb they were holding lands inside other explosives, causing them to go off. Hank, seeing the explosion, tells the general to handle the fortress as he runs back to their area, hoping Shawl is safe. As Hank rushes back to their area, Cain initiates an assault on the colonel, manipulating him to consume the poisonous alphid, leading to a rapid decay of the colonel's body. In a desperate attempt to intervene, Claude draws his sword, trembling with fear and determination to protect his brother. Cain revels in Claude's terror, savoring his brother's anguish as he attempts to control him as well. However, before the process can be completed, Hank throws his spear at Cain, cutting off his right arm. He then fires a shot, but Cain turns into mist, only to reappear again with his arm fully healed. Hank asks Shaul to check on Claude and asks Cain why he was there when he could have sent other Incarnates. Hank quickly deduces that the situation may be a diversion, and his intuition proves correct as Cain unveils his true intentions. He discloses that they plan to form an alliance with the South, having set their intricate plan into motion while the Northern forces were preoccupied with the fortress. Cain's claim is backed up by the Incarnate and corpse invasion of the southern capital. Claude dismisses the idea of an alliance, branding it an outright invasion. Cain laughs at them and tells Hank that he is a fool, and that Miles' death should be a lesson that he can't trust humans. He tells Hank that humans are deranged creatures and Incarnates are born from it. Cain tells Hank that he should be thanking him for killing Elaine, who is responsible for everything. Hank tells him that humans make mistakes, and they try to correct them, just like Elaine tried to do by ending them all. So, he understands humans, and for that reason, he is carrying on Elaine's last wish. Cain tells Hank that he has no right to fulfill their oath, so he will continue living as he likes. As Hank witnessed his friend, Cain, succumbing to madness, and he transformed into his fearsome werewolf form, releasing a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the surrounding mountains. Hank lunged at Cain, his claws tearing through the air, but to his dismay, Cain's wounds healed instantly, nullifying any damage inflicted. Undeterred, Hank persisted, relentlessly clawing at Cain, only to find his efforts futile against Cain's extraordinary regenerative ability. Amidst the onslaught, Cain taunted Hank, urging him to embrace his true nature, just as he had done before at Whiteckerch. Ignoring Cain's words, Hank refused to succumb to the darkness within him. In a desperate move, Hank seized Cain's head in his powerful grip and crushed it with all his might, only for the entire area to be engulfed in a sinister red mist. From within the eerie mist emerged multiple clones of Cain, forming an army of doppelgangers that surrounded Hank. Working in perfect synchrony, the clones launched coordinated attacks, inflicting painful wounds upon him. Struggling against the overwhelming assault, Hank fought back with unwavering resolve, but his efforts were fruitless, as he couldn't harm the seemingly endless horde of Cain's clones. Meanwhile, the northern soldiers are conquering the fortress. The sun begins to shine, and Hank, who is badly injured, turns back into his human form while Cain's clones disappear. Cain slashes him in the neck with his hand and tells Hank that he should stop fighting him and join them. Shaul runs towards him as he remembers what Shaul had said about him being human and how he should fulfill his oath to slay his friends. He stands up, but before he could collapse, Shaul catches him, and she smiles at him, and he smiles back. Seeing Shaul makes Cain's memories and rage kick in because Elaine loved Hank instead of him. He unleashes his final form and goes after Shaul, saying she should not exist in their world. But Hank blocks his attack, saying they don't have a world. Cain's power also increases as his wounds heal and his hair turns white. He releases a powerful roar at Cain, which causes him to move away. Before Cain could react, Hank quickly closes the distance between them and punches Cain, smashing his face into the ground. Shaul rushes over to Hank's side as he collapses to the ground. But Cain is not done and expresses that Hank had displayed his true power as the king of beast incarnates. He disappears only to reappear behind Hank, but after seeing the North Patria flag flying over their fortress, Cain disappears, promising they will meet again. Although the North had won, preventing their capital from being captured, the new Patria Cain built had taken over the South, becoming the strongest Patria nation. Realizing this, the North president orders his men to return to the capital. With the new threat coming from the west, Hank and Shaul depart on an adventure to find the other Incarnates so that Hank can fulfill his oath. Hank asks if Shaul is okay with joining him, and she tells him that she has found her goal, which is keeping her own promise to him. Meanwhile, Cain has Elaine's body in a tube, and he also has a shard of somnium. He states that Elaine should keep watching as the world that Elaine was trying to avoid has just begun. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.